I wasn't the kind of person who believed in ghosts, or curses, or any of that supernatural bullshit. I was a man of logic, of reason. I paid my bills on time, followed a strict morning routine, and didn't let irrational fears dictate my life. So when I moved into my new apartment, a quiet little one-bedroom on the outskirts of town, I wasn't expecting anything weird to happen. It wasn't a fancy place. The rent was cheap, mostly because the building was old. But it had charm. High ceilings, wooden floors, a decent-sized kitchen. The kind of place that felt like it had history. I spent my first night unpacking, arranging furniture, making the place feel like home. I was exhausted by the time I finished setting up my couch and coffee table, so I decided to leave the kitchen for the next day. I ordered some takeout and sat on the floor, eating straight from the container while watching TV. Nothing about the apartment felt off. Not yet. It wasn't until I finally got around to organizing my kitchen the next morning that I noticed a drawer. It started with something simple. A drawer in the kitchen. The second one from the top. It wouldn't stay shut. At first, I thought it was just old hinges, or maybe the angle of the floor was slightly uneven. I pushed it closed, turned my back, and it slid open again with a quiet, smooth motion. I frowned, pushing it shut harder this time. I even yanked it out completely to check the tracks. They seemed fine. Nothing broken. Maybe it was just loose. I grabbed a screwdriver and tightened the screws on the sides, making sure everything was in place. Satisfied, I pushed it closed and leaned against the counter, waiting. Seconds passed. The drawer stayed shut. Good. I turned back to making coffee. But just as I reached for the sugar slide, I turned, a weird crawling sensation creeping up my spine. The drawer was open again. Not wide open. Just a few inches. I stared at it. I could have sworn I had just shut it. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but something about it felt wrong. Like it wasn't just opening by itself, it was being opened. I shook off the thought, blaming it on my imagination. Maybe I just hadn't pushed it in hard enough. So I closed it again, this time wedging a butter knife between the handle and the counter to keep it shut. I sat down on my tiny dining table, sipping my coffee, try to ignore the weird feeling in my stomach. I scrolled through my phone, trying to distract myself. A few minutes passed. Then, thud. The butter knife had fallen to the floor. The drawer was open. I didn't want to overthink it. I refused to let myself be one of those people, the kind who freaked out over small, explainable things. Maybe I had just knocked the counter without realizing it. Maybe the vibrations from the floor had nudged the knife loose. But a feeling had settled deep in my chest, an unsettling knowing that I couldn't shake. I spent the rest of the day unpacking the rest of my things, forcing myself to ignore the kitchen drawer. That night, I double-checked all the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked. Just as I was getting into bed, I had a thought. I walked back to the kitchen and peered around the corner. The drawer was still shut. I exhaled, relieved, and went to bed. But at exactly 3:14 a.m., I woke up to a sound. Slide. I bolted upright in bed. At first, I wasn't sure what had woken me. The apartment was silent, the only noise coming from the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. But then, as I sat there in the dark, heart hammering in my chest, I heard it again. Slide. A soft, deliberate sound, like wood gliding against wood. I threw the blanket off me and stood up, listening. My stomach felt tight, my breath shallow. I walked to the kitchen, my footsteps slow, hesitant. The apartment felt colder somehow, as if the temperature had dropped while I was sleeping. And there it was, the drawer, Open. Waiting. I swallowed hard. A flicker of something sharp and unpleasant twisted in my gut. No, this is ridiculous. I grabbed the handle and slammed it shut. It stayed closed for about 5 seconds. Then slide. It opened again. I just stood there. I don't know how long, but I felt like I was waiting for something to happen, for something to reveal itself. But nothing did. After a moment, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I wasn't going to let this get to me. Not some stupid drawer. I went back to my room, grabbed a roll of duct tape, and sealed it shut, layer after layer, pressing it down hard, making sure there was no possible way it could move. I stared at it for a long time, waiting. Nothing happened. Finally satisfied, I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. For the first time in days, I actually slept, but when I woke up the next morning, the tape had been peeled off, neatly, as if someone had taken their time removing it, and the drawer was open. I stared at it, my stomach twisting in knots. This wasn't just some loose hinge. This wasn't my imagination. Something was wrong with this place. Or worse, something was wrong with me. Had I removed the tape myself in my sleep? Was I sleepwalking? I had never done anything like that before, but the alternative. I didn't want to think about the alternative. I spent the next hour searching my apartment, looking for anything that could explain this. But I found nothing. Just an old, empty apartment, and a drawer that refused to stay shut. I didn't go to work that day. I told myself I was just feeling off, maybe a cold coming on, or maybe I just needed a mental health break. But the truth was, I didn't want to leave the apartment. Not until I understood what was happening. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the drawer. It was still open, just slightly. A few inches, the way it always was. Like it was waiting for me to do something. I grabbed my phone and started Googling. Drawer won't stay shut. Possible causes. Most of the results were exactly what I expected. Warped wood, poor alignment, humidity. Nothing about drawers undoing duct tape in the middle of the night. I kept searching, but every logical explanation felt like a weak excuse. I knew what I had seen. I knew how I had left the drawer the night before. And yet, here it was. Open again. I reached out, pressing my fingers against the smooth wooden front, then slowly pushed it closed. It slid into place without resistance. I stood there, hand resting on the counter, waiting. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. I exhaled slowly. Maybe it's over. Then slide. I yanked my hand away like I'd been burned. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't sleepwalking. Something was wrong with this drawer. I spent the rest of the morning trying to ignore it. I cleaned the apartment, played music, even turned on the TV just to fill the space with sound. But every time I passed by the kitchen, my eyes would dart toward that drawer. It didn't move again. Not while I was looking. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted. Not just physically, but mentally. I decided to order food instead of cooking, because I sure as hell wasn't going into that kitchen if I didn't have to. I sat on the couch, takeout container in hand, flipping through channels on the TV. And then I heard it. A sound. Not the drawer this time. Something else. At first, I thought it was coming from outside. A faint, distant noise. Then I realized it was coming from the kitchen. It was whispering. I froze, my body going rigid. The sound was soft, barely audible over the low hum of the TV. A faint, dry whisper. My ears strained to catch the words, but they were too quiet, too slippery to hold on to. It didn't sound like a single voice. It sounded like many. A quiet chorus of voices speaking in hushed, hurried tones. I felt a cold sweat break out along the back of my neck. I turned off the TV. The whispering didn't stop. It was coming from the drawer. I forced myself to stand up. My legs felt shaky, like I had been sitting for hours, even though I knew it had only been minutes. I walked toward the kitchen, every instinct in my body screaming at me to turn around, to leave the apartment, to run. But I had to know. I had to see. I stepped into the kitchen. The whispering was louder now, but still impossible to understand. Like a conversation happening just out of earshot. I reached out. My fingers brushed against the drawer handle. The whispering stopped. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry. I grabbed the handle and yanked the drawer open all the way. Inside, nothing. Just silverware. A few knives, forks, and spoons. The same way I had organized it the day before. No speakers. No hidden wires. Nothing that could explain the sound. I slammed it shut, my breath coming fast and shallow. I didn't imagine that. I heard it. Something had been speaking from inside the drawer. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, every muscle tense, listening for the whispering to return. It didn't. Not that night. But something else happened. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to a different sound. A faint, slow creaking. At first, I thought it was the wind outside. But as my sleep-addled brain cleared, I realized it was coming from inside the apartment. From the kitchen. It sounded like wood shifting, like a drawer slowly opening. I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't get up. I didn't check. I didn't want to know. I lay there, forcing my breath to stay steady, pretending I was asleep. Eventually, the noise stopped. When I woke up the next morning, the drawer was open. But this time there was something inside it. Something that hadn't been there before. A single piece of paper folded neatly, with one sentence written in shaky, uneven handwriting. It's not yours to close. I stood there, staring at the piece of paper. The handwriting was wrong, too uneven, like it had been written by someone whose hands weren't steady. The ink looked faded, like it had been there for years, but I knew it hadn't, because I had cleaned this drawer out myself. And I sure as hell hadn't put that note inside. I didn't want to touch it. Something in my gut screamed at me not to. But I had to know. I reached out, hesitating for just a second before picking up the paper. It was cold to the touch, despite the warm morning air. I unfolded it carefully, hands trembling. It's not yours to close. The words stared back at me, silent and unmoving. I flipped the paper over, hoping for something, anything, that would explain what this was. There was nothing on the back, just an empty, yellowed surface. I swallowed hard. This wasn't just a broken drawer. It wasn't some stupid trick of humidity or warped wood. Someone, or something, was leaving messages for me, and it didn't want me closing the drawer. I spent the rest of the morning pacing the apartment, my mind racing. Had someone been inside while I was sleeping? No, that didn't make sense. The door was still locked, and the windows were all latched shut. But the note, it hadn't been there before. I checked my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. I wanted to call someone, but who the hell would I even call? The police? Officer, my kitchen drawer won't stay shut, and now it's leaving me notes. They'd laugh in my face. And I couldn't call a friend because, well, I didn't have many of those anymore. I sat down on the couch, running my hands through my hair. I had to do something. So I grabbed a pen and a piece of paper. And I wrote back, "Who are you?" I folded the note and placed it inside the drawer. Then, slowly, deliberately, I closed it. And I waited. An hour passed. Then, too, nothing happened. I felt stupid. Maybe I really was just losing my mind. I went about my day, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. But by the time evening rolled around, I couldn't stop myself from checking again. My hands were sweating as I pulled the drawer open. The note I had written was gone, and in its place was a new one, shakily written, just like before. Do not close it again. I felt a sharp, twisting fear in my stomach. I didn't like this. I didn't like that whatever it was could respond. But I was done playing games. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the note. Proof. Then I yanked the drawer open all the way, pulling it free from the counter. I dumped everything out onto the floor, forks, knives, spoons clattering against the tiles. Then I flipped the drawer over, checking every inch of it. Nothing. No hidden compartments. No speakers. No strings. Just an ordinary, empty wooden drawer. So how the hell was it doing this? I placed the drawer back in its slot, then grabbed my duct tape again. This time, I didn't just tape the front. I taped the entire thing around the sides, underneath, securing it in place with layer after layer. Then, just to be safe, I pushed the heavy kitchen table against the counter. Let's see you open now. I went to bed early, feeling a sick sort of satisfaction. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Not because of a sound, not because of a nightmare, because of a feeling, like something was watching me. The room was dark, but I could still make out the shape of my furniture. The dresser, the door, the open closet. Wait, not open. It had been closed when I went to bed. Hadn't it? I sat up, my heart pounding. That's when I saw it. A piece of paper, lying on my nightstand. I didn't want to touch it. But I had to. I reached out with shaking fingers and picked it up. One sentence. The same unsteady, jagged handwriting. You didn't listen. I felt my stomach drop. No. I threw the blankets off and ran to the kitchen. I didn't want to see it, but I had to see it. I flicked on the light. The tape was gone. The table had been pushed back, and the drawer was open. Just a few inches, waiting, like it had never been touched at all. The drawer was open. Not just open, but sitting there exactly as it had before. Like it hadn't been taped shut. Like I hadn't pushed the table against it. Like it had never been touched at all. I backed away slowly. My pulse was hammering in my ears, a deep, dull thud, thud, thud that made it hard to think. This wasn't just some stupid coincidence. This wasn't some trick of warped wood or bad hinges. Something was here, and it didn't care what I did to stop it. I forced myself to breathe, to think. Okay, think. This thing, whatever it was, it had rules. 1, it didn't want the drawer closed. 2, it could move things. 3, it could leave messages. 4, and now it could enter my bedroom. I gritted my teeth. No. I wasn't going to let this thing scare me into running. I took out my phone, still gripping the crumpled note from my nightstand. I snapped a picture of the drawer, the kitchen, the floor where my tape had been peeled away. Then I walked slowly, cautiously, back to my room. The closet door was still open, and the air felt wrong. Like the temperature had dropped just a little too much. I swallowed hard and forced myself forward. There was nothing inside, just clothes, shoes, a couple of old boxes, but the space between them fell off like something had been there just a second ago. I turned on the light. Nothing changed. I wanted to check my phone to see if I had heard anything last night. But when I opened the voice recording app, my stomach twisted into a knot. There was already a file. A new one. 3:12 a.m. I didn't remember recording anything. And I sure as hell didn't set my phone to do it automatically. My hand was shaking as I hit play. At first, there was nothing, just soft, ambient noise, the occasional rustling of sheets as I moved in my sleep, and then a creak, soft, slow, like wood bending under weight. The closet door, then a scrape, like something being dragged across the floor. I pressed my hand over my mouth, ball rising in my throat, and then a voice, faint, too quiet to make out at first. I turned the volume all the way up, holding the phone close to my ear. A whisper, barely a breath. "Why won't you listen?" I threw the phone down like it had burned me. I felt sick. There was something in my room last night. Something close enough to whisper. Something that had been standing right by my bed. I forced my legs to move, to get me the hell out of that room. I needed out. Now, I spent the rest of the day at a coffee shop, barely touching my drink. I scrolled through forums, desperate for anyone who had experienced something like this. Nothing. Nothing except the same old stories about poltergeists, haunted objects, energies that clung to furniture. I didn't believe in ghosts. But this wasn't just some made-up horror story. This was happening, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't go home until the sun had set. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I didn't have anywhere else to go. The apartment was silent when I walked in. The drawer was still open. I walked past it without looking, straight to my room. But the moment I stepped inside, my stomach dropped. The air was different, heavier. I flicked on the light. The closet door was shut again. No, I knew I'd left it open. I stepped closer, every nerve in my body screaming at me to stop. I reached out and pulled it open. Nothing, just the same old clothes, the same boxes, and then my breath caught in my throat. There was something new, tucked into the space between my shoes. A piece of paper. I knelt down, my hands clammy as I picked it up. The same handwriting, the same uneven scrawl. But this time, the words were longer, and they sent ice down my spine. It was never about the drawer. I ran out of my bedroom. I didn't care about leaving my stuff behind. I didn't care about the cold night air. I just ran, and I didn't stop until I was outside, breathless and shaking. I pulled out my phone, desperate, my fingers slipping as I tried to dial a number. Any number. But my hand was so sweaty that I nearly dropped it. When I looked down at the screen, my heart stopped. My call history, it was all blank. Not erased. Not deleted. Just kind of like I had never used my phone before. And then, as I stood there, gripping it so tightly my knuckles ached, a notification popped up. A new text. No number. No contact name. Just one message. Come back inside. The message sat on my screen like an open wound. Come back inside. No number. No sender. The cold night air wrapped around me, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen, every part of me screaming to run, to leave and never come back. But then the lights inside my apartment flickered. Once, twice, then they cut out completely. And I knew it was watching. I ran to my car. I didn't even care that I'd left my keys inside. I just needed distance. I sprinted down the sidewalk, past darkened buildings and empty streets, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I slumped against the counter, my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone. I tried calling anyone. No dial tone. No signal. Nothing. Just that empty, dead silence. Like I had never existed at all. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the gas station until morning, my back pressed against a rack of potato chips, my mind spinning in an endless loop of what the hell do I do now? I checked my phone again. Still no service. But there was one new text. From the same blank sender. You can't run. I nearly threw my phone across the room. My head was pounding, my thoughts a tangled mess. I couldn't go home. I couldn't leave. So I did the only thing I could. I went back. The door to my apartment was already open when I arrived. Just a crack, like it had been waiting for me. I stepped inside, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The air was thick, heavy, like the whole apartment was holding its breath. And then I saw it, the drawer. It was open again. No, not just open. It was wider now, like something had been clawing at it from the inside. I stepped closer. My body was numb. This drawer, this thing, it wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just some stupid ghost story. It was a door to something that wasn't supposed to be here. I reached forward, my fingers trembling, and grabbed the edge of the wood. I pulled. For the first time in days, I pulled the drawer all the way out. And beneath it, there was a hole. A deep, black, rotting hole in the bottom of the dresser, stretching into something impossibly dark. The wood around it was scratched, deep gouges that looked like they had been made from inside. My stomach twisted into knots. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the edges of the hole. And then something moved. Something shifted in the blackness. Something breathed. I staggered back, my heart hammering against my ribs. No. No. This wasn't real. This wasn't possible. But I had seen it. I had heard it. And I knew it had seen me too. A sound echoed from the hole. A soft, scraping sound, like something was crawling upward, coming closer. I didn't think. I grabbed the drawer, shoving it back into place, slamming it shut. I taped it down. I pushed the dresser against the wall. But deep down I knew it wouldn't matter. This thing, whatever it was, had already gotten out. I left the apartment that night. I drove to a cheap motel on the other side of town, locked the door, and sat on the bed, staring at my phone. No calls, no texts, no messages. But I knew it wasn't over. I knew this wasn't the kind of thing you could just walk away from. And I was right, because later that night, when I finally drifted into a fitful, exhausted sleep, I woke up to the sound of a drawer sliding open. Hashtag epilogue. I never went back. I broke my lease, left everything behind, moved to a new city. I don't tell people why. I don't talk about it. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up to the faint sound of wood scraping against wood. And I know it's still looking for me. I know it's still open. And I know one day it's going to find me again.